This is Razer's new flagship keyboard, the DeathStalker V2 Pro. As well as being their top of the line keyboard, it's also the first time we've seen Razer's low profile optical switches. It's packed with almost every feature you could want from a keyboard, but do they all add up to an overall great product? Hey guys, I'm Matt and welcome to the Kit Guru YouTube channel. As I mentioned just now, today we're going to be taking a look at the very top of the Razer keyboard spectrum, the DeathStalker V2 Pro. This board has all the bells and whistles and it's Razer's flagship board for anyone who wants to splash out. Razer are also releasing the DeathStalker V2 and the DeathStalker V2 Pro TKL. The Pro versions are wireless and then the non-Pro version is wired. We'll be focusing on the big boy today though, the DeathStalker V2 Pro. And with a retail price of 250 quid, you're definitely going to be splashing out if you choose to pick one of these up. 250 quid for a non-custom keyboard is pretty insane. For that amount of money, it simply has to deliver in every department. As is the usual, we're going to kick things off with the packaging and I'll show you guys a quick unboxing. The DeathStalker V2 Pro comes in an instantly recognisable Razer branded box, of course, which is very similar to the box of the Huntsman Mini Analog that I reviewed on the channel a little while ago. The top of the box shows a picture of the keyboard in a glossy print, along with some brief details on the low profile switches, the different connectivity options, and then the 40-hour battery life. That's pretty decent claims on 40-hour battery life. We'll look at that in more detail later on in the video. There's a few more details on the specs on the back, including the measurements. This keyboard is insanely thin. We'll look at it in more detail again in the design section of the video, but is a seriously low profile keyboard. The DeathStalker V2 is protected by some good quality foam inserts at either end of the box, but unfortunately isn't in anything other than a clear plastic bag. I would have definitely liked to have seen some sort of dust cover or a carry bag included with this, considering how much this thing costs. Also included in the box is a 2 meter braided USB Type A to USB Type C cable for using the keyboard in wired mode. There's a USB Type A to USB Type C converter, there's an instruction manual, and then of course there's the Razer stickers. Just as I mentioned in my review of the Huntsman Mini Analog, I would have liked to have seen some extras in the box, even more so when the price has been bumped up to 250 quid. Some alternative keycaps like a spacebar or an escape key would have been nice, and a wrist rest wouldn't have gone amiss either. So looking at the design of this keyboard overall, the first impressions of the DeathStalker V2 Pro were very, very good. This is a really, really nice looking keyboard. It's incredibly thin, sitting at just 21mm at the bottom and tapering up to 26.6mm at the top. That's with the feet flat. The video won't quite do it justice. When you see this thing in person, it really looks nice and you'll be shocked at just how thin it is. The backplate is made from anodised 5052 aluminium, which feels smooth and cold to the touch. It looks really sleek and it wouldn't look out of place in any clean or minimal setup. Sitting on top of that are the low profile laser etched keycaps, which are made from ABS plastic, but they have what Razer call an ultra durable coating, which I'm not sure how they've made that, but they do feel nice. They feel similar to the aluminium backplate and they have a very smooth and very, very slightly textured finish. The top of this keyboard is absolutely gorgeous. The high quality materials used really make this board look and feel very premium, something which has to be expected at this price point. In the upper right corner, there's a dedicated media key and scroll bar, which are both made from an aluminium alloy. Both the wheel and the button have a very solid tactile feel when using them, although the button on my review unit does rattle a tiny bit. It's nothing major, but it's something that I had to point out. Now, branding has been kept to a minimum, which I really like. The only Razer logo visible on the top is positioned on the chin of the DeathStalker V2 Pro. It's very small and it isn't RGB backlit. It looks pretty nice in my opinion. And talking about that chin, that's a bit of a strange design choice. The backplate sticks out a good bit further along the bottom edge than the rest of the board. When looking at it from a standard position while sitting at my desk, it's not too noticeable. But if you look at this keyboard directly from above, then the keys are not centered, and that just looks a bit odd sometimes. Not odd in a bad way, it just looks a bit strange. I think a symmetrical design would have looked much better. Along the top edge of the keyboard, you'll find the USB-C connection port, toggle switch for selecting which connection method you'd like, as well as turning the DeathStalker V2 off, and then dedicated buttons for switching between the different Bluetooth profiles. Disappointingly, the toggle switch and the Bluetooth buttons are plastic, unlike the media controls. I mean, did they run out of aluminium alloy in the factory or something? I would have liked to have seen aluminium on those buttons as well. The bottom of the keyboard is made from more plastic, just like the Huntsman Mini Analog, and I'm guessing this was done again to keep the weight and the production costs down. Although here the retail price is higher, so it's a little bit more disappointing. The keyboard feet are exactly the same as on the Huntsman Mini Analog 2. They have two different levels of adjustment. I personally prefer them fully extended at 9 degrees and find the keyboard the most comfortable when it's set up like this. Overall, I really like the design of the DeathStalker V2 Pro. I can't help feeling they took some big inspiration from the Logitech G915, which is by no means a bad thing. They're both, this and the Logitech are both really, really nice looking low profile keyboards. Now let's talk about the build quality, which I've found pretty disappointing if I'm honest. There's quite a lot of flex to the frame of the board, and I've heard a few creaks when testing this thing out. In Razer's defense, this is a very, very thin keyboard, and that sort of design comes at a price. The aluminium backplate does help to sturdy things up a bit, but the board bends quite a lot when put under a small amount of pressure. Just don't be too rough with it if you do pick one up, or you'll end up with this sort of thing happening. Now, that is easily fixed just by bending it back, and not everyone is going to go doing a flex test on their keyboard. I had to because I was reviewing it, but a £250 keyboard should not bend like that. The low profile keycaps feel really good under the fingers when typing, but if you were to remove one, they are very, very thin. They're going to be because they're low profile, but they do feel quite brittle when you've got one in your hands. At the end of the day, the DeathStalker V2 Pro should feel better than this for £250. And while I can appreciate that a very low profile design like the one that Razer went with will always compromise on like the structural integrity, some additional strengthening inside of the chassis, inside the case, would have made this keyboard feel much more solid. Now let's talk about the RGB. You either love it or you hate it, and personally I love it. I haven't been disappointed by Razer's new flagship board in regards to the RGB. As is the usual, Razer's Synapse software is used for configuring the RGB effects with a decent amount of preset options available and the ability to create complex effects using the Chroma Studio within Synapse. The laser etching on the keycap legends is supposed to help the RGB effects shine through, and the lighting is quite bright. It can be seen pretty well in well-lit rooms, and of course in darker environments it really comes to life. The lighting transitions are quite smooth. There's no stuttering that I've noticed when the colours are changing quite quickly. Overall, the RGB options on the DeathStalker V2 Pro are quite good. The lighting is quite bright. I've never struggled to see it. The effects are quite fluid. The transitions are nice. I haven't noticed any stuttering. There is nothing new here that we haven't seen in Razer's products before though, so I would have liked to have seen something a bit different on their flagship board, try and push the boundaries a little bit, but it's just standard RGB effects that we're used to already. The switches in this keyboard are brand new though. This is the first time Razer have released a keyboard with their optical switches in a low profile format. They come in both linear and clicky variants, with the review board that I've got containing the linear version. And they feel really nice. They're soft, but they're not mushy. They have silicone dampeners built in, which makes them feel great when they bottom out. It's quite a satisfying experience typing on this board. And typing on the board is really comfortable. The feeling lies somewhere between a typical gaming keyboard with linear switches And then a typical laptop keyboard, because of that low profile design, it feels like a laptop keyboard. If you type a lot as well as game, then I think you'll like the feel of this board. Now let's listen to a sound test so you can hear exactly what the Razer DeathStalker V2 Pro with the low profile optical linear switches sounds like. So I think the keyboard sounds okay. The stabilizers could be better, but they're certainly not the worst I've ever heard by a long way. I've been pretty pleased with the experience of using the DeathStalker V2 Pro during my testing. It feels solid when typing, and although it is quite big, I haven't had any glaring issues while gaming on it. If you're used to a 60% board, you're not going to be able to make big, massive mouse movements, and it'll take some getting used to, but that's just part and parcel of using a full-size keyboard over a 60% keyboard. So I touched very briefly on some of the connectivity options earlier in the video, but to add more detail to that, the DeathStalker V2 Pro has 3 options when it comes to connecting it to your device. There's the hyperspeed 2.4 GHz wireless connection provided by the very, very small USB dongle that can be found tucked away in the bottom of the keyboard. Then there's Bluetooth 5.0, with the keyboard having 3 different Bluetooth profiles to allow you to easily switch between connected devices. And then finally, you've got the option to go wired with the included USB-C cable. Now, I've gamed and I've typed and just generally used the keyboard on both the wired and the 2.4 GHz wireless connections, and they've both been flawless. I can't tell any difference in the latency when using the keyboard wirelessly, and I'd be happy playing any type of game without any cables. I haven't noticed any difference whatsoever. The Bluetooth, on the other hand, has some very noticeable input delay, as is the usual with keyboards on Bluetooth connections, so I wouldn't suggest that you use this for gaming, but it does work okay for everything else. So it's a great option for connecting to a secondary laptop without having to remove the dongle from your main PC. So if you want to quickly switch from your PC to your laptop, use the Bluetooth on your laptop if you're just going to do some typing or internet browsing or whatever it is. And what's more, if you have multiple Razer hyperspeed wireless enabled devices, then you can connect them to one dongle. On paper, this sounds great, but I tried and I could not get the new Barracuda X headset to be picked up in the pairing utility in Synapse. Although I am reviewing this unit before it's actually been released, so it may be something that can just be fixed with a quick software update. Now, more and more keyboards are coming out that are really versatile with their connectivity options, with the Corsair K70 Pro Mini Wireless and the Razer Huntsman Mini Analog having almost identical setups to this keyboard. But this is great to see in wireless keyboards, with more options and more choices for buyers just being a good thing in my opinion. There's nothing wrong with having more choice. So let's talk about the battery life of the DeathStalker V2 Pro. Razer reckon the battery in this keyboard will last 40 hours on a single charge with the RGB at 100%. And to be honest, they're not far off. They're pretty much on the money according to my tests. I charged the keyboard to full on Thursday morning, and then I used it constantly on my PC for work and for gaming, and that's included playing a fair bit of Escape from Tarkov. I had the RGB set to 100%, and I didn't have to plug it back into charge until late Saturday afternoon. I came somewhere close to the 40 hours stated battery life, and the keyboard charged back up to full relatively quickly in maybe between an hour and 2 hours. The software used to configure the DeathStalker V2 Pro is Razer's Synapse, and if you've not used a Razer product before, then this is the software that controls and customises pretty much all of Razer's products, with the exception of a few, such as the new Barracuda X headset. There's not very many that aren't controlled by Synapse. I covered the software briefly in my review of the Huntsman Mini Analog, and nothing has changed since then. The software is still just okay. It's nothing mind-blowing, but it gets the job done. There are only 3 tabs for configuring the DeathStalker V2 Pro. One for customization, and this is where you can remap almost any key across the whole board to do almost anything you want. And that includes the media scroll bar. You can assign different actions to scroll up and scroll down, which is a nice little touch, and that could be great for increasing productivity or optimizing your workflow if you're into editing or programming or coding or anything like that. Then there's the lighting tab, which is probably the first place you'll visit to get that RGB set up just how you want it to match your setup. The preset options are all listed, and it's as easy as just selecting them from a drop-down list. If you want to dive deeper, then you're going to have to install the Razer Chroma Studio module that is found inside Synapse, and then you can get stuck into creating the perfect lighting setup to match everything else that you've already got. And then finally, there's the power tab, which only contains 2 options, one for dimming the lighting after a certain period of time, and then one for shutting the keyboard off after a certain period of inactivity. That's great if you just get up and walk away from your computer. You're not going to end up draining the battery while you're AFK. Overall, the user interface of Synapse is relatively clean, and the software is pretty easy to use. I've used worse software and I've used better. Razer's Synapse is okay, it's pretty average. So my final thoughts on the DeathStalker V2 Pro are very mixed. It is so expensive. I felt like I had to judge it quite harshly to give you guys my fairest assessment, as if you do consider going out to buy one of these keyboards, then it is a lot of money to spend. The design is phenomenal, there's no other word for it. The board is extremely low profile and it looks beautiful in my opinion. The keys feel solid and are really satisfying to use. As I mentioned a second ago, the software is okay, it gets the job done. The big disappointment for me is the build quality. The DeathStalker V2 Pro has a worrying amount of flex and bend. It creaks and rattles in places it shouldn't for a keyboard of this price. Based on looks alone, this keyboard is exceptional, but considering every aspect of the board, including the price, then it's a bit of a different story. Time will tell how long this will last before things start to wear out and break, but for now, this is a good full-sized gaming keyboard that is on the pricey side. If money's no object and you want the absolute best that Razer has to offer, then this is it. That's all for the video today, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. Please leave a like down below if you did. Let us know in the comments what you think of this new flagship board from Razer. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to keep up with the latest PC gaming news and reviews. If you want to check out our merch, there'll be a link in the description. And if you want to support us on Patreon, which would be really appreciated, there'll also be a link for that down in the description. I've been Matt. This has been the Razer DeathStalker V2 Pro. I will catch you in the next one. Look after yourselves. See you later.